All right, so we have come to the beginning of the receiving of the Ten Commandments, but I want to just back up a little bit again and kind of review because there's a couple things I want to just dwell on. God didn't come uninvited to this party. That's important to know because God rarely forces himself into human history. The reason that God was there in Egypt with the Israelites is because for several hundred years they had been pleading to be rescued. They had no idea what that meant. They had no concept of what rescue looked like. All they knew was they were really uncomfortable where they were. And so God came onto the scene and made an agreement with them in a sense that said, I will rescue you to your true purpose. And that will rescue you from the circumstances of your life as well, from some of the issues that you're experiencing. Because the true bondage they were in wasn't just from the Egyptians. The true bondage was they were not living up to the life that they were intended, that they were created to be. And I love that quote that, where did Tim go? Well, how did he say that?
In order to find your
way, you have to find your why. Exactly. And so they needed to understand what this journey was about. I was listening to a podcast this week, and they told a story about an ancient rabbi. I don't know where he existed, but his name was Aqaba. And he was walking home from the village to his house, and it was dark and foggy, and he missed the turnoff to his house. He ended up at the castle, at the gates of a fortress. And a soldier called down and said, "Who are you and why are you here?" And he said, "Excuse me?" And the soldier said, "Who are you and why are you here?" And the rabbi said, "How much do they pay you to sit up there at that guard gate?" And the soldiers kind of, "Well, they give me 10 denarii a week." And the rabbi said, "I will give you 20 denarii a week if you will come to my house every morning and ask me those questions." Who are you and why are you here? And see, that was the question that the Israelites really needed to have answered. Who are you and why are you here? And that is the question that we constantly need to be asking ourselves. And it's so easy to drift from that, isn't it? And you suddenly find yourself just going through life, going through the motions, going through whatever's happening, and you forget what your real purpose is. And God has a specific purpose for you. And the reason things are happening is because either you're in the middle of a purpose and you're learning what that means, or you've drifted off of the purpose and you need to get back. The other thing we talked about last week was the difference between darkness and evil. And I've told you this before, but it's important for you to remember that my messages are really just a reflection on my journey. And I had been pondering this concept for a while, and I had been really struck by how darkness and evil are not synonymous. That darkness can reside in evil and also in light. And goodness can reside in darkness as well as in light. And sort of to illustrate that, this week I had an incredibly dark morning. It was just really, really painful, really, really difficult, and just kind of, in a sense, shook my world. And I'm still trying to understand what that all means, but I'm trying to see it from a perspective not of evil, but what does this mean for me? How is this going to shape me going forward? I was listening to a podcast this week, the same podcast. It was someone's interviewing Elizabeth Gilbert. And a year ago, in January, I think it was like on the 4th of January, a year ago, she lost her very best friend in the world. And for months up into her death, she was dying of pancreatic cancer. And there was one point Elizabeth talked about where she was walking down the street and she was complaining to God. And she said, "God, this is so incredibly painful." And I can give her exact words, but I'm not sure what I'm supposed to learn, but could you just increase the pain until I learn what I needed to do so I can get past this? And the interviewer said, "Yes, It's like I feel like I want to tell God, either you're not a very good teacher or I'm not a very good student because I'm not getting it. So sometimes we want to move away from the pain. We want to move away from the darkness before God is able to use that to really shape and to mold us in the way that we need to be. And it's our instant knee-jerk reaction. Something hits us, something pains us, I need to move away from that. Or if something's dark, I'm feeling discouraged, I'm feeling hopeless, that must be a bad thing. And oftentimes it is those very, very times in which God is able to come to us, and God is able to reveal things to us, and God is able to speak into our lives. And I'm not sure what exactly God is showing me in this particular darkness that's happening right now. But I'm confident that this is part of the process. This is part of the plan that is moving me forward. So now we come to the foot of the mountain. And we come to these principles for living. I call them principles for living rather than commandments. And for a specific reason that I'm not going to tell you. But there's a reason. But here's what I want you to do as we come to these. John 1:1 says that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then it goes on to say that Jesus is, in fact, the Word. So I think it's very appropriate, and I find it very helpful to visualize that the presence of God coming down that mountain is in fact Jesus. And Jesus is the one that's speaking these commandments. So imagine that Jesus is sitting in a room filled with sinners, with prostitutes, with every kind of sin that you can imagine, thieves, robbers, churchgoers, all those sinners. And he's explaining these principles for living. And that sort of changes your perspective on it. At least it does for me. Instead of seeing sort of this angry, mysterious, reserved God hiding behind these clouds, I see the loving presence of Jesus. And coming to these people and saying, look, you're really, really messed up. And these people are really messed up. I mean, for hundreds of years, they've been living in incredible bondage. You know how difficult it is to get someone out of a situation in which they've been under bondage for so long. People that are living in abusive situations, it is so difficult to rescue those people. It is so difficult. So can you imagine? There are generations of oppression these people are dealing with. And suddenly, God has to present himself to them in a way that is healing. And sometimes that comes across as painful and harsh and difficult. Isn't that right? You hear me on this? And so we need to keep that in mind as we see who this God is and understand who these people are. And the other thing that you will see is that God doesn't dump the whole wagon on them at once. He's going to gradually reveal who he is and what his character is like. And a very good illustration of this is in the very first one. So let me just jump into that. And we'll start into this. We're in Exodus chapter 20. So the people have come to the foot of the mountain, and my Bible has a little black letter up there. It says the Ten Commandments, and maybe yours does as well. I don't know how the Ten Commandments came to be, because actually there's more than just 10, and not everyone has the same order. If you look at the rabbi scriptures, it's different than the Hebrew scripture or the Jewish scriptures. If you're a modern day Jew, you'll have a different set of Ten Commandments than a Protestant. And different groups of Protestants have them in different lists and in different orders. They've divided them differently. If you look at the Hebrew letters of the Ten Commandments, it's two words for most of them. It's you shall not, and then one word. You shall not, one word. So there's this whole row of you shall not, one word, you shall not, you on. And then there's a few that are a little bit more than you shall not. It's expanded on that. But they end up with 10, but it's slightly different than our 10. And even if you look at them in different places in the scriptures, they're different. And the other thing that is important later on in chapter 22, it says, Moses turned and went down the mountain with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands. And it said they were inscribed on both sides, front and back. So obviously this is a lengthy thing. It's not just like 10 phrases. So we've boiled it down to where we say they are the 10 commandments, but actually this whole section are just different principles for living. And I think in a sense it's kind of a mistake to just divide it up and say that there are 10. And to say these are the 10. I think it's better to see them in a broad sense, that there are some really important principles for living in this next passage, and so that's how we're going to approach it. So the first principle, it says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. In other words, he's reminding them, I'm the one you asked for, you called, I came, I brought you out of that. And also remember that when I brought you out for a purpose. And, we talked about that a few minutes ago. He brought them out because his plan, God's plan from the beginning, is to redeem this planet and redeem all the humans in it. And so he's raising up a priesthood of people. And by the word priesthood, he's just talking about a group of individuals. And they were all part of it. Every man, woman, and child is a part of it. And this priesthood is going to be the beginning of the seeds of transforming the planet. And in the New Testament, we discover that that's us as well. Another thing that's really important to remember in all this is that at this time in history, the average lifespan was probably about 35 or 40. All right? So you think about that. We know that the human brain doesn't completely finish developing until you're in your late 20s. So God's got this really narrow window to work with to shape and to change a person's life before they're gone and they're trying to pass it on to their children who start out all messed up and then they only have a few. So you see, you kind of have a sense as to what a difficult challenge this is for God, and it is for us as well. Even though we live longer, it still takes us forever to shape and to change some of the thinking, some of the ideas that we had. All right. God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of their parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. I'm lumping these two together. And I think the obvious thing that we often see when we see this is we say, well, there are some objects that I've put before God that, I really want a really nice car, and so that's the object that I've put in front of me. That's my image. That's kind of become my idol. Or maybe we would say it's my work, that I put my work in front of my relationship to God, or maybe even human relationships. So we have, historically, I think, as followers of God, we have always seen these things as objects in front of God. And they're certainly valid. But I think there's also another aspect, another perspective, another way to see this. And that is ways in which we are not living up to our purpose. Not simply having things that hinder us from God, but ways in which we aren't living up to what we were created to be. And that is a corporate understanding, something we as a church, but it's also very individualistic. And whether you are a year old, 4 years old, 6 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, 60 some years old, that somewhat changes and evolves and becomes something different, but it's always a part of your original purpose, and that is to be a redeemer of this creation and the humans that are on it. And that is so multifaceted. Maybe what God is calling you to do is to be more artistic, and you're wasting too much time watching TV when you should be creating, writing, or drawing, or painting, or sculpting, or building something. Maybe the way you are to redeem this planet is to create friendships with people from other cultures. Maybe your thing in life is to go around smiling all the time, but you forget to smile. Maybe instead of seeing transportation as a way to get somewhere, you see that as a time to pray for our planet. There's just so many facets to this, but it is so different than simply saying, I have a thing which is between me and God. Not that that's not valid. I believe that that can be extremely valid, and some people have things which are more important than God. But what I'm trying to help you see is that what God wants for you is to have a purpose, is to have a meaning to your existence, is to have some place that you're going, some place that you are participating in, some movement that you are in, even if it's just you and God. But it's a movement toward healing and health and for peace and for wholeness. Because I want to remind you that God has a rescue plan and we're it. There isn't a plan B. There's one plan. There's only one plan from the beginning of Genesis on how this world and how the humans in it are going to be reclaimed, and we're it. And so every single one of us are participating in that or not participating in that. And so by having other things that you make your purpose, by having other people that you make your purpose, by having other even emotions that you make to be your purpose, those are becoming the gods that you're worshiping. Those are becoming your rescue plan, not God's rescue plan. Can you see how you can use things to sort of rescue yourself which are not part of God's rescue plan? That you imagine they will be the answer to your life? Traveling, vacation. Not that any of those things are wrong. But if that's the point of your life, the purpose of your life, then you're missing the best purpose of your life. You're missing why you are here. Why you specifically are in this place at this time, in this body, with these friends and family and relationships, so that you can be part of God's amazing plan of redemption, rescuing the planet. In the midst of that, there will be some times of uncertainty, some times of questioning, some times where God seems really distant, where things seem really dark, where things seem really quiet. But as long as we are determined, that we are tenacious to be a part of that plan, He welcomes us into it and will lead and guide us into paths of righteousness for His sake and for ours. Stand up and let me give us a benediction. May God infuse you with a confidence that you are incredibly important to this great plan of redemption. You have a part to play, and may you see it clearly. Amen.